is, fear and I think we're all afraid. People are naturally afraid of criticism. We want to be liked. We want to be loved. All those things. I mean, it's all human nature. But I do think we got a cadre of police leaders. We've got a cadre of people sitting at the board table, and even in my own organization, I've seen the evolution of police leadership, where we just have a different era. People that are committed to change, people that want to have a better life, and quite frankly, people that have blazed the trail. It may have been really hard as hell for them to blaze the trail, but they don't want people coming up behind them to have to blaze the trail like they did. And so I'm really proud of the cadre of police leaders we have across the country and even within Waterloo. I've been so impressed. I would say the last probably 2 years, things are driving a little more in the sense of, people are getting it and understanding it. But, if I could do anything different, I would have definitely put a lot more elbow and grease and leg work into the start of this of, what my philosophy was and why I wanted to make change, based on data, based on how our members feel. But anyhow, Jerry, it's been a great process for myself, reflecting on who I am as a human, who I am as a police leader. It's been a healthy approach.
No, that's good. It's interesting because it's involvement, but it's breaking down old habits, a lot of old habits. So yeah, I get it. So if we talk about the apology, and you did touch on that, why now? I mean, there is a long history around police and the 2S LGBT community. I hope we're a little bit better in Canada than most places. There's the bathhouse raids and a whole bunch of other stuff afterwards, but that's history, and hopefully we're learning from that. So in you with the apology, you didn't just do an apology. You did a directional handbook as well. Maybe touch a little bit on that, like what the purpose behind that was, because you can't have an apology without an action, obviously.
Yeah, no, let's be candid. I mean, much like racism in Canada, policing has a long insidious relationship with our 2S LGBT community. I mean, in many ways, we are instruments of the government. You talk about the bathhouse raids and actually, criminalizing people for who they are under, past legislation. And so, several years ago, we started the Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police was looking at equity as one of their key strategic priorities, looking at inclusion and diversity and the general whole piece. And through some of the research, one of our members came forward and basically said, are you aware in 1968 that the official position of the CCP was to oppose federal legislation that would decriminalize homosexuality? And of course, I'm actually kind of proud to say in 1968, I was probably a discussion between my parents. I actually wasn't around yet, and so for me to comprehend this even at my age and as a police leader, I'm thinking like 1968 doesn't seem that far away for me. It still seems fairly relevant. And I think, how in the hell, like, what were they thinking? That's just, my approach to this. And, we went through all the history. We got to actually articles. The meeting was in Montreal, which I find interesting. Montreal, I grew up there. It's a cosmopolitan community. It has a large 2S LGBT community, and so for me, I found it very, shocking in many ways, trying to figure out, well, what were they thinking? Like, what was the period of the conversation around the board table? So we got all of the different pieces and we figured it out in the sense of, confirming it. We went through some records to try to figure out minutes of meetings, etc. And it was basically opposition to federal legislation. And when we talked to our membership, and we have an equity, inclusion, diversity committee that's been doing a lot of work and a lot of policy work, it was the belief that, for us to reconcile, to us to really commit to a better future, of a thriving relationship between policing and all communities, and in this case, particularly the 2S LGBTQ plus community, we had to actually apologize. We had to apologize as an association for a decision of our grandparents, those governors that actually were leading the helm. And so, I believed and I felt that it was the right approach. We had a special committee. We had several experts from across the country working on this, providing us contextual expertise. And special thanks to members of, Ottawa and Edmonton in particular, and Vancouver, and other agencies that were sitting around the table, Toronto and Halton, providing us with contextual information of the apology is great, but the apology is an apology for a decision that our board of directors made in 1968. And the reality is there's 194 police services in Canada, and they're likely all at different stages in their relationship with their respective 2S LGBTQ plus communities. Some may have healthy relationships, some may have thriving relationships, some may have relationships that are eroding, some may have some that are in conflict. And so what we developed was a toolkit to provide local, like the 194 services, and they all have different capacities. Some are really large, some are medium, some are major cities, to provide those organizations a toolkit to begin a conversation around reconciliation, conversation around the present, but really with a goal to build a thriving future. Policing has to be reflective of the communities we serve. And so we need to recruit talent from all communities. And in this particular case, we felt that, and I felt very strongly that the apology nationally would send a message of, we're committed to the work that we're doing. We recognize our past transgressions, and we apologize for those that were criminalized. We also apologize for those that have suffered in silence. I recognize that people that I work with, people that I spend time with every single day, when I was a young officer, a mid leader, and now a senior leader, that many of them suffered in silence. And in fact, they couldn't celebrate who they were and who they are. And they couldn't be proud of that. And I think, for us as police leaders, got to pause. We have to recognize that there's ability to say we're sorry, and to also say we have an action plan to ensure that our next set of grandparents and governors and leaders do not actually follow the same path that our predecessors did. And so that's how we came to where we're at. It's about a 70-page toolkit. We wanted to ensure that everybody was educated around appropriate terminology, appropriate recognition, appropriate acknowledgement, in fact, even encouraging a localized apology, looking at, opportunities for growth. And the only thing I'll say, unfortunately, is the pandemic has really prohibited that interpersonal connection. This is great, but I mean, obviously, when you're with somebody, you're breaking bread, you're having coffee, you're having heart-to-hearts. I mean, I think obviously goes a long way. So that's how we landed where we landed, Jerry. The feedback has obviously, for the most part, been very positive. Many people view this as a positive step forward. But there has been criticism around consultation and some of those pieces. We accept that, we acknowledge that, and be pleased to tackle that head on.
Well, actually, I was going to bring that up. Well, I was going to say, because when we read it, it was everybody was a police service that put the tool together. So I think the community, what's happening is the struggle is if they feel they're not part of the conversation, it's not the solution. So even though what you wrote would be not very different from the community perspective, but I think that's just a struggle. I think they just want to be involved in the conversation. And I think this is where we all, and definitely pandemic has not been easy for all of us, that's for sure. And I mean, really, the other thing that kind of struck us as odd is that it wasn't a big headline, about, which was kind of surprising, that it was a little bit of good news opposed to all the bad news with pandemic. So, but I don't own Bell or anybody, so.
Well, so Jerry, first off, obviously this had been about 2 years of work. And again, something I was really committed to. I just became the president in August of 2020, and it was something that I wanted to accomplish really quick. We had been doing some work on this behind the scenes, and I felt that this was a good opportunity to signal everything happening in our world and our society. I agree with you. We thought that this would be really a good opportunity. So we actually, on the International Human Rights Day, chose to release a video. In a perfect world, we felt that probably in Ottawa or somewhere across the country, a news conference, with policing colleagues, and to your point, representatives of the 2S LGBTQ plus community would have been a much more powerful statement. It would have been a much more powerful approach. On the issue of consultation, it's an excellent point. I know that our colleagues from Edmonton and Halton, as well as Ottawa, that worked on the document, did have consultation with their connections, with their communities. I also recognize that those are not representative of national peace, and I think there's a lesson learned in that for how we do stakeholders and consultations. And listen, I own that as the president. I obviously approved the apology, I approved the toolkit, and afterwards, started having some conversations saying, so who actually did we consult? And again, we had obviously members of the 2S LGBT community, but all of them are working in police services. And all of them, really super dedicated to this, basically said, well, Chief, like we actually connected with so-and-so who's our friend in, Edmonton Pride, and we connected with so-and-so who's our friend in the, Tri-Pride Committee in Halton, and so that's great, but we missed a national connection. But I do think there's an opportunity for those discussions to continue. I do think there's an opportunity to have larger national dialogue around that, consultation, and how do we actually advance even the toolkit. The toolkit is a start. I still think there's a national platform for action, for change, a national framework, for example, for even, how we investigate intimate partner violence within the 2S LGBTQ plus community, how we investigate, with compassion and care and empathy, sexual assaults surrounding victims and survivors within the 2S LGBT community. Like there's framework opportunities for us nationally to continue that dialogue. And I think, obviously we wanted to bring some localized perspective so that police services could deal within their unique communities. But I think in everything, one of the wisdoms I've learned in all of this is there's always reflection and feedback and critique, which is all helpful. And again, we don't actually fall into the same trap next time around.
That's great. Yeah, just one question. So did everybody in the association support this concept?
Yeah, so this was supported by our board of directors unanimously. Everybody was on full support. Obviously, our equity, inclusion, diversity team had a working group specific to this, and kudos to our friends in Edmonton, Halton, and Ottawa that did significant work, as well as the Toronto Police Service did a lot of efforts, and I'm very grateful for that. This was unanimous. There was no concerns or issues. And again, I do think, one of the things that we're in some ways actually regretful for is we weren't able to celebrate it. We felt that, this was I think a really good piece of public policy change. We obviously got some media attention, but it's also been a hard narrative for policing, to shift the narrative. Right now we're a bit of a polarizing institution. Even around drug policy, we earlier in the year, in June, myself and Chief Mike Sir from Abbotsford and Chief Adam Palmer from Vancouver, we announced some significant policy around drug policy and decriminalization and treating addiction as a health issue. And although we got a lot of positive, some stuff, again, it was kind of lost in sort of mainstream media. In the last couple of weeks, I've been able to regain some of that national attention on drug policy based on some dialogue. But I think there's opportunities for growth and change on this platform, and I do think out of a post-pandemic world, we'll be able to actually shine the light on the toolkit and shine the light both nationally and locally on the 2S LGBTQ plus toolkit, and talk about how we actually reconcile, deal with some present challenges, but also make sure that we have a stronger future for all. Because, at the end of the day, I always, I guess maybe, I don't know, I don't feel old, but I do feel old in some sense, like through stress and all those other things, and, through some weight gain and gray hair and all those other things that happen. But I still believe, fundamentally, as humans, we want to be loved. I think in our community, if we need anything right now, it's leadership, it's unity. There's so much divisive hatred and just, I'm hoping that post-pandemic we can, all of us, find an opportunity to leverage some of the work that we're all doing collectively to actually heal and to look to the future. And I think it is about reconciliation. For me, justice is about, you owe me something, or the system owes me something, and that's fair. We should seek justice, but I'm looking for actual healing, and let's actually look to the future so that the people that are coming behind us have a much easier path, a much easier journey, and actually can live their lives and be proud of who they are, regardless of the path that they've taken to become who they are. And I think we should celebrate that. That's really my hope for the toolkit, is that it actually across the nation, doesn't matter where you are, in a small community or where there's still maybe stigma. I look at some of the work we had some phenomenal officers in our community that did a lot of work in high schools, particularly with the 2S LGBT community, and particularly with young men who were struggling to come out. And our officers were a big part of that, and actually were invited to the Pride Prom to support and be allies and to share their experiences. Because that's what we want. I think that we all want every human to be valued, every life to be valued. And that's where I'm hoping we see some change. I'm optimistic that the toolkit will bring about those conversations, Jerry.
Yeah, no, I hope it does too, because it's got to start somewhere. There has to be a conversation. Like, it doesn't, like, two people involved in a conversation, and sometimes we forget that. Actually, just I think it's great. I think you're making a good step, and in honesty, Chief, you seem very genuine, and I think that's what people are missing, that you're being very genuine about the opportunity to make a step forward.